915 Talk is a production of Desert Voice Media. You can visit desertvoice.media to learn more.
915 TALK.
The world is looking at El Paso.
What will we say to the world? From the KELP studio in El Paso, this is 915 Talk.
And now your host.
Good afternoon, beautiful citizens of the borderland. This is 915 Talk, and I'm your host, Andy Frecka. Today we are broadcasting yet again from the heart of the world's largest borderplex. We're here at the KELP studio in El Paso, and we have Mac Daddy Del Norte on the board. Mac Daddy, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Andy, and yourself?
This journey of education is truly a thrill ride.
Yes.
Do you agree?
I totally agree.
Okay, so we're learning about our personal finances with TrueVise financial planners.
Yes.
Yeah, we're learning about politics with some of our local leaders.
Yes, sir.
What else are we learning about, Mac Daddy?
You know what? We're about diabetes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
the eye doctor, our health.
Yeah, lots of doctors. Yeah. Also church leadership. We this is Christian radio, so we have quite a few church and nonprofit leaders come through. Yes. Some athletes
as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I know what excites you the most.
Oh, yes.
Is our monthly history conversations.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we've gotten good feedback from these conversations before. We talked about John Wesley Hardin.
Yes.
I could find nothing good about his life, but it, but it was interesting to spend a whole hour talking about someone who really needed the Lord.
Definitely. Oh yeah.
We also talked about Pancho Villa, Oñate. And today we're going to be talking about the Civil War era in El Paso.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know shockingly little about it.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we have the true historian extraordinaire of the borderland, who achieved a rank in the military equal to his last name. And he always has colorful tales for us. And we're able to just kind of dive in deep. And, you know, the tagline for this program is let's learn to love our city, love our neighbor, give God all the glory. And I do believe it is important for us to have an idea of where we've come from so we can understand who we are today.
Yes.
And love our city, our community even more. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, let's give a very warm borderland welcome to the one, the only, the historian extraordinaire, Sergeant Bernie Sargent. Bernie, welcome back to a 915 Talk.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I talk about you guys all the time and share the connection so other folks can enjoy your broadcast also.
Well,
it's fun to talk and you know, to share what little history I know with the folks. And I get feedback from them. They say, hey, you know, you're really wrong about that. I said, but my initials, look at my initials. I can do this.
Well, we'll leave it to the listener to put that joke together. But you know, I was telling you before we went on air that I just read my first history book on El Paso. It was a lot of fun. It starts back the book started back even in Waco tanks, the prehistoric time, and all the way up to present times, even mentioning the tragic Walmart shooting. So a lot of history that, of course, that the borderland has been through. One of the most really historical places in America. And one of the parts that kind of popped out when I was reading the book was the Civil War era. So I wrote you and I said, hey, can we talk Civil War? Because I grew up in Ohio, and of course, it wasn't the Civil War. It wasn't the war between the states up there. It was a Civil War. And I only had a vague recollection of where Texas took place, like Texas's role in the Civil War. And to learn a bit more about it in the book was fascinating. So let's kind of, I think the the place would be interesting to start would be El Paso's, this island in the desert, Bernie. You know that, and it's so far away from everything. What can you do you have a sense of what the attitude of the people in El Paso was at that time towards the Civil War? Was that someone else's war, or were they feeling the emotion of what was happening so many miles away?
I think quite the contrary. The population of El Paso was very small at the time, mostly made up of the Mexicans that lived on the north side of the river, because this part of the United States had just become part of the United States in 1848. So it was pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as settling, there was a handful of Anglos that moved into the area, some of whom had actually fought against Mexico with the United States. And they saw an opportunity to start a business on the border and the river in an area that was called a number of things at the time, like Coons Rancho, Smith's Rancho. There was a couple different names that they had for it. It wasn't incorporated until 1873, so they were kind of languishing in a proper name for it. But when the Texas decided to secede from the states, they took a vote, and at the time, Sam Houston was the governor of, or president, I should say. No, he was governor. He was originally president of the Republic of Texas. Then he became governor. And in 1861, when they took a vote to secede, he was adamantly opposed to it. He said, you're waking a giant. They're very calm and collected up north, but if you stimulate it, it just might turn real ugly on you. And he refused to go along with the Southern sympathizers. And in fact, as soon as he said no to the vote, he was no longer the governor of Texas. And they had a gentleman take his place for a short time. And then they had an election in 1861, and Francis Lubbock, of Lubbock, Texas fame, Francis Lubbock became the governor, and he was very much a secessionist. Tough with the English language today.
He was a sensationalist secessionist.
Yeah, he kind of was. Yeah. So they did the vote. He became the governor, and they put in place different things, like they wanted to make sure that they honored their commitment to the South. And in 1862, they set up a volunteer, well, they say it was volunteer enlistment, but it really wasn't too much of a volunteer enlistment. If you were between the ages of 18 and 35, you had to sign up.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you were white, I have to preface that by saying if you were white, you had to sign up. But they soon found that they weren't getting enough soldiers, so they raised it to 45. And then in February of 1864, they extended it 17 to 50. Now, there was one caveat, though. You could hire a substitute to take your place. What a nice, sweet deal that was. Oh, I've got money. Hey, you're going to war. But that's kind of the way Texas was moving. Well, El Paso, ironically, was inhabited by a handful of Caucasians. They called themselves the 44. And that tells you about how many Caucasians lived here about the time that we were looking at joining Texas and seceding. And they met at Bendel's Saloon, downtown El Paso. And it was called by Simeon Hart, who ran the Hart's Mill, or they call it El Molina. He processed wheat and sold it to the Mexican military and sold it to the American military. And as the things were leading towards secession, he became a big supporter of the secessionist movement prior to, during, and after the secession that they voted on in El Paso. And of the 44, only 2 voted against secession. It was W.W. Mills, William Wallace Mills, and Anson Mills. And they kind of knew right away that things were not going to go their way, especially when Hart sat back with a champagne. He goes, "Champagne for the secessionists and hangman's noose for the losers."
Oh,
and
wow.
So it sort of said what was going to happen. And so both mills left the area. sadly, a few years before, Anson Mills had lived here, and he was actually hired by another participant in the 44, Josiah Crosby, to determine a layout of what could become a city, which could become will become El Paso. So Anson Mills did the layout for Josiah Crosby. Josiah Crosby had moved to Texas from Alabama. He was born in South Carolina, but moved to Alabama. His family moved to Texas, and he became an attorney in Texas. He was living in East Texas at the time, and he was convinced because of his health to move to El Paso, where he became the county attorney in the El Paso area. They didn't call him county attorney at the time, but so he was very influential, and he brought Anson Mills along with him, and they decided that they were going to work with a landowner in El Paso by the name of Billy Smith. I called him Uncle Billy, William T. Smith. And William T. Smith bought a tract of land from Ponce's Rancho. He bought Ponce's Rancho from a Mexican who had been raising crops on the north side of the river for quite some time. And William Smith had run into a couple of situations where he naively trusted someone to take a whole lot of money down into Mexico and bring back goats that he could raise on the north side of the river. This is long prior to the Civil War. So William Smith had this land, and he was kind of running out of money when he was approached by Josiah and Anson Mills to do a layout. And he said, I'm really not interested in staying here anymore. I'm going to be leaving this area and moving west, because that's about the time people were finding gold in California. So Mills and Crosby put together a consortium of investors, and they bought the land from Uncle Billy. And then that's when Anson Mills laid the property lines out and kept calling it El Paso, because right across the border was El Paso del Norte. So they couldn't call it the same name. And so they called it El Paso, and it stuck. That ultimately became the name of the community we now know as El Paso. 1858, after a lot of bargaining with landowners in downtown El Paso, they got the grid laid out and the map was drawn. Right now, that map is in storage at the Museum of History downtown. They had an exhibit for a couple of years, which is pretty phenomenal. Look at a map that was drawn that long ago. I first found out about that, I guess it was probably about 30 years ago. I was working as commissioner of the County Historic Commission, or chairman. And I went over to the city hall. I got to know the guys over there quite well. And I was down in the basement where they stored a lot of their information. And one of the engineers down there said, "Hey, you got to see something." I said, "Yeah, okay." So I went over and sat down. He pulls out this PVC tube, and he pulls out these papers that are wrapped up inside the tube, pieces of it falling off, and he unrolls it. And it was the original map drawn by Anson Mills. So I went, "What's in a tube?"
Wow.
And put in storage, and then it got they got some grant money and got it restored.
Wow.
But, they didn't know at the time what the value of that piece of property was, that document was, like so many other things. But I got to see that thing firsthand. It was so cool.
Yeah.
But so anyway, here we have these two guys who were partners, and ironically, as things progressed towards secession, Crosby went to the dark side. He's supporting the Confederacy, and Anson Mills, as I mentioned earlier, was supporting the Union forces, or staying with the North. And ironically, when Anson and W.W. Mills left, they also lost all of their holdings, all their property. It was taken over by the Confederacy that was headed up by Simeon Hart. It caused a lot of animosity. Well, W.W. Mills, who, by the way, had received a commission to West Point, he flunked out. He didn't make it all the way through West Point, but he did get a commission. And so W.W. Mills became a spy on the south side of the river. And he was captured by some Southern sympathizers, and they brought him across the river. And Juan Hart was who I'll read some of his quotes. He was quite a character. We talk about some of the yellow journalism now and what's said and what's printed. It doesn't hold a candle to what people like Simeon Hart used to put in print, because he had a small newspaper until I think it was the early 1870s, and he would print whatever he wanted, and nobody ever said anything other than maybe we need to have a duel. But he was quite a character. And from that point on, both mills really had a deep-seated hatred for Simeon Hart, because he was so much a supporter of the mills being locked up. Well, Anson Mills did escape, and he did get away. So he was, he covered his butt on that one there. He later, by the way, he went on to serve quite brilliantly as a general, ultimately a general in the United States Army.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you a little bit about his story a little later. But he, after the Civil War was over, in the 1880s, I believe it was, he and Josiah Crosby became partners. So they buried the hatchet. They became partners. They were good friends. They actually built the Central Hotel downtown El Paso, and it burnt down in the 1890s. And when it was torn down and rebuilt, they became the Mills Building, which Anson Mills. And so that gives you a little bit of history of that little piece of property there. And it was designed by the Trost and Trost. So there's a lot of history. And it was at one time considered the largest monolithic building in the world, which was kind of incredible for a couple of years. And then obviously people have to outbuild each other. So that it became a very significant piece of property in El Paso forever. And thankfully, the folks at the investment company in Franklin Land and so on, they have fixed that building up, and it's just beautiful now.
Right.
So that's kind of what took place. Well, there was one other brother with the Mills also, Emmett Mills, who Anson had convinced needed to come to El Paso. And one of the last stagecoach rides at the beginning of the Civil War from El Paso west to California, Emmett Mills was on that, and the stagecoach was ambushed by Apaches, and Emmett lost his life on the stagecoach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, here you've got Crosby, you've got Hart, and you've got the Mills brothers as very significant players in what took place with the Civil War in El Paso. And they continued. In fact, the James Wiley McGoffin was also part of the 44. And we all know of Joseph McGoffin, and we know a little bit about James Wiley, or most people do. But he was very much a supporter of the secession. Oh, and here's an irony about Simeon Hart. When you think of people that are voting, or I should say, supporting the South, he was actually from upstate New York.
Oh, interesting.
You would think that, here's a New Yorker. He's going to be like you Ohioans. He's going to support the North. But he didn't. He was a very ardent supporter of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting. And he, in fact, had donated $250,000 to the Confederacy.
Wow.
To Richmond, which is worth over $11 million in today's money.
Sure.
So he's a very, very wealthy person.
Right.
And he threw his money at the South. And he was constantly donating food, mainly grain, bread, things like that, to the Confederacy while he could, until I think it was 1862, when the Union forces retook Fort Bliss and took his property and everything away from him, which didn't make him very happy. And his blistering commentary in print was even stronger after that. But
wow.
And that took place. In fact, he lost his property, and he tried to petition after the Civil War to get it back. But the Harts, who kind of bore a grudge for a while, they said, nah, it's not going to work. And even though Simeon Hart petitioned the New Mexico, like their Supreme Court, their version of the Supreme Court, to get his property back, he convinced the court, the judges, to not do it. Ultimately, early 1870s, the two Mills brothers, W.W. and Anson Mills, sold the property through the federal government back to Hart for $10.
Oh, wow.
So he wasn't totally out of it, but he did lose an awful lot during the Civil War, and he never forgave them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're just joining us, we're with El Paso historian extraordinaire, Sergeant Bernie Sargent. I always say that because I enjoy seeing his face when I say it.
I'd say I'm extraordinary, that's
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. But really enjoy these conversations, and we're talking about really not just a colorful time in borderland history, but as we can tell, it was a foundational or a cross point in the history of our region. So just love that we're learning both about the Civil War history and the characters, so to speak, here in El Paso. We're about to take a break. Before we go into the break, this is your daily reminder that 915 Talk is listener supported and is a production of Desert Voice Media. The website is desertvoice.media. And if you're enjoying these conversations about El Paso history with Bernie Sargent, you can actually go on to desertvoice.media and go to the 915 Talk section and find all the previous conversations and listen to them in podcast format or watch them on YouTube. We've made it where you can watch the radio through the miracle of modern technology. But in any case, we really appreciate you listeners joining us on our journey as we learn to love our city, love our neighbors, and give God all the glory. We're going to go into a break, and when we get back, more about the Civil War era in the borderland with Bernie Sargent. Do not touch that dial.
We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
915 Talk is listener supported and is a production of Desert Voice Media. That's right. It's people just like you who make this program possible. Together with Desert Voice, you can learn how to better serve our neighbors and pray for our community. To become a Desert Voice Media partner, you can visit desertvoice.media. That's right. That's the website, desertvoice.media. Take a look and join us today in reaching our borderland for Christ.
Are you looking for a Bible teaching church on the west side of El Paso? This is Terry Gray, pastor of Calvary Chapel Sun City and speaker on the Summons broadcast heard each weekday at 5 p.m. here on this station. Calvary Chapel Sun City is located at 960 West Borderland Road on the west side of El Paso. We hold services on Wednesday evenings at 7 and on Sunday mornings at 9 and 11. You can find out more information about us on the web at www.ccsuncity.org. The Lord bless you, my friends.
We're back. You're listening to 915 Talk.
And we're back. We're with historian Bernie Sargent. We're talking Civil War era in the borderland and the characters involved. Bernie, as you were sharing all of this, I want to make sure I understand broader Texas history. You said Sam Houston was opposed to seceding.
Absolutely.
And if I was reading correctly between the lines, was that part of why he lost power?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So
it was a giant difference in support for the secessionists as opposed to the Unionists. I think it was probably about 10% of Texas population voted to stay with the Union.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. And then why did Texas, a state that, and probably I'm just going to be asking for your opinion on this, but Texas is a state that really feels that it has its own personality, its own history. It's very proud. Why did it feel even the pressure to make a decision between the North and the South? Why wouldn't it just allow the North and the South to deal with its own problems?
Well, keep in mind, too, this is only maybe 15 to 20 years after Texas became a republic and then a state. So there was still a lot of this feeling about control from elsewhere.
Okay.
You figure, Mexico controlled this area for so many years. Well, Spain and then Mexico. Well, and a little bit of France there for a while. I think that there was this inner feeling that, hey, you know what? We're our own boss.
Okay.
And, so a lot of the folks were a lot offended by the fact that here you had a group of people out of Washington that wanted to control everything. now slavery, as we all know, is a horrible thing.
Yeah.
It became something a necessity with all the crops that were being grown in Texas. They didn't have enough manpower, nor did a lot of the people want to do the labor that goes into picking cotton and all the other fruits and vegetables that we were growing in this state. And so there was that problem, and it was not unique to Texas. It was all throughout the South. And if you dig deeper, you can find that it took place in the North also. There was slavery taking place in the states that supported the Union. But Texas has always been somewhat of an independent state, an independent republic, so to speak.
Right.
And this was just one more nail in the coffin going, no. This sounds better to us than having these folks in Washington controlling it. And when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, the folks in Texas just went nuts. They did not like him at all because they saw this control factor taking place. And had it not been for the fact that the Democrats ran two candidates against him, he might not have got elected. Because at that point in time, you didn't have two parties running for the office. You could have as many people from one party or the other running for the same office in Washington, D.C. And that really threw a monkey wrench in the Democrats' effort to get the presidency. So when he got elected, it was a very fast movement that people were saying, no, we're not going to have anything to do with this. Excuse me, this person and his bevy of his cast of characters that they knew that he was going to put into place. Ultimately, it worked out in the long run for the country, but at the time, the unknown. Plus, you had people like Simeon Hart with some of the blistering commentary that he threw out there in his newspaper. So it's like now when you're listening to X or you're on social media, you hear some of this stuff that the people spout, and you got to go, now, was that fact or fiction?
Sure.
And long before they had AI and X, but they depended on the newspaper, and they depended on the newspaper tree, which was in downtown El Paso, that people would place or nail things on there for other folks to see as to what was going on. And they bought into a lot of this baloney that was being published. Let me read this to you. This is the way that the press was being reporting. Hart's political animosity was tinged with personal hatred. When the Confederates invaded New Mexico in 1861, Hart called for the confiscation of all property held by Union sympathizers. But when Unionists prevailed and confiscated his property in El Paso, Hart yelped like a puppy and fought like a bulldog until the federal courts restored his assets to him, except for the former slaves. He was not allowed to take them back. Then he was also talking, this is a few years after this, there was a gentleman by the name of Cardis who was involved with the Salt War, which we could talk about at length at another time. And what he wrote about Cardis was, he's a social Israelite, a moral leper, a thing devoid of honor, principle, or religion. God Almighty could only have created such a being as an example of how much mendacity, meanness, cowardice, and general rascality could be crowded into one human skin. This is what people were reading, and I'm going, what do you believe? Let's see, Simeon Hart, he's a pretty upstanding guy.
Well, it's funny to hear this because it sounds very similar to unhinged social media posts today, only a lot more eloquent.
Yeah, he was learned.
Yeah. And so
this stuff, and people go, boy, he has those long words. He must know what he's talking about.
Right. And so your general feeling is that Texas wanted to secede just because it has this history of being independent. But if I'm reading between the lines here, what I understand is Texas took a vote. So if Texas took a vote, why did El Paso feel the need to take a vote?
Well, there's even to this day, there's this feeling of independence from the state of Texas.
Right.
I think you've probably seen it in the short time you've lived there. It's,
right.
They feel sequestered, so to speak. They're way out there on the edge. I mean, literally. And
Right.
even back in the day, there was a movement afoot to, okay, do we want to stay part of Texas, or would we want to be part of New Mexico, or let's start our own state? Like I mentioned in a previous broadcast, where they came up with this name Montezuma, and they decided they wanted to secede from Texas and become their own state, which would have incorporated some of West Texas, some of southern New Mexico, and some of southeastern Arizona into one beautiful state. Well, it got as far as Washington, D.C., but then it was voted down, so that just didn't happen. But even when I lived there for almost 40 years, there was this feeling like Austin doesn't care, or they do care, but only about Austin.
Sure.
And, yeah. So that feeling permeates today, but it was even stronger back then.
Yeah. And
from point A to point B. I mean, we kiddingly say that when you drive across the border from New Mexico into Texas, the sign says Beaumont tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at is, we can look through history and talk about how much has changed, but really how much is the same. And so you have the folks in Austin making their vote, and El Paso said, well, we're going to take our own vote. And as it turned out, that vote lined up with Austin at that time.
Yeah.
We can only guess what would have happened if it had been a different vote to history, but what a pivotal point in history. So did Texas secede immediately with everyone else? Is that what happened?
No, not immediately. The Carolinas were the first to go after the Fort Sumner. And they clicked off states, 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month at a time. But it was just a matter of within a couple months, they had formulated the Confederacy.
Okay, so that was pretty fast. And then the Civil War is starting. You said that it was voluntary service, but not actually voluntary.
You will volunteer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You had to be white to fight for the South. Am I right to understand then that the Hispanic population was not involved?
Oh, quite the contrary. And it's interesting when you talk about that, because I visited some of the cemeteries here in East Texas, and there's a lot of Confederate flags on Hispanic graves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of African Americans fought for the South also. So it wasn't unique. I mean, although mandatory only constituted whites, so Hispanics and African Americans could join, and they did.
Okay, so you have this crazy moment in history. Texas joins the Confederation. People are leaving from Texas. Young men and even older men, as you said, were going to go fight for the Confederacy, and even those of Mexican or Hispanic background were fighting. And I guess with El Paso, you think of the Great Civil War, the great battles of the Civil War. They were far away. What action reached the borderland?
Quite the contrary. It was very active. Probably the furthest west skirmish that took place between the South and the North was in Picacho Peak, Arizona. And there was, I think, upwards of 21 soldiers killed in that battle. So it wasn't a really big deal. But July of 1861, a Lieutenant Colonel Baylor marched in from San Antonio. And Fort Bliss at that time was located at McGoffin's Ranch. Well, at the corner of Ranch Willow and McGoffin Streets. They had moved from the area downtown by the convention center. They were there from 1848 to 1851. In 1853, they set up a military base, mainly because they were concerned about Mexico trying to take the land back after the Gadsden Purchase. But anyway, they set up a military base at Ranch Willow and McGoffin Streets, and that lasted until 1868. Well, when Baylor marched in with about 800 troops from San Antonio to take over this area, his aspirations were to march only as far as the border of what was considered the Confederacy, and that was up just north of Las Cruces. So his goal was to march from San Antonio up into Mesilla and then further up, just a little bit up the road, to the military base that they had up there, or fort they had up there. And that was it for the time being. And that was as I mentioned, July of 1861. Well, in December of 1861, General Sibley had convinced the president of the Confederacy that they being the Confederacy, needed to take all the land in Arizona and in Colorado. Colorado mainly because the silver mines and the gold mines, they needed the money. And then what he would do once he captured Colorado, he would march west and he would capture California, so they'd have all the gold they needed to fund their war efforts. So he comes into town, 1861 December, and March they continued to head north. 1862, they continue to head north. They get into a little battle just north of Las Cruces in Valverde. And that little battle there, they were outmanned, outgunned, but they were a little smarter in the way they approached the Union forces at Fort Craig. And what they did is the Confederacy kind of concealed themselves and then fired on the soldiers that were from Fort Craig and managed to defeat them. And in the process, I think we talked about the Blue Whistler Cannon a few episodes ago.
Yes.
That's when the Whistler Cannon was captured.
Okay.
And taken along with the Confederacy up north, and they ultimately, I think it was March of that year, when they ended up in Glorieta Springs, just east of Santa Fe, and they by rights should have won the skirmish with the soldiers up there. There was a group of soldiers from Colorado that marched south because they knew the Confederates were heading their direction. They didn't want them in their backyard, so they marched down, and they were being beat soundly, except of the stupidity of the Confederate quartermaster, who moved all of their supplies into a canyon thinking it was safe there. But what he didn't count on is the fact that the locals by then were fed up with the Confederates robbing and pillaging their property and giving them worthless script for what they took. And the money was not worth anything. And so they helped the Union supporters find this supply train, skirmish down, or I should say, climb down the valley and set everything on fire. They killed the livestock. They set everything on fire that they could. So all the supplies were gone. And by the time the Confederates got to Glorieta Springs, they didn't have a whole lot anyway. So now their ammo was gone. What was left of their food was gone. And so they decided they needed to march south. Now, they all blamed Sibley for this because Sibley was more intent on spending time in his private wagon with ladies and liquor. And so he wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to what was going on outside. And when he realized that they were being beat because they had no ammunition left, they decided to head south. And as they headed south, he kept the wagons and the mules and made most everybody else march. And so by the time they got back to El Paso, what was over 3,000 soldiers was down to about 1,200 soldiers left.
Wow.
They either died or deserted. And so they brought in a handful of very sick individuals to nurse back to health. Sibley continued south down to San Antonio, and he left a couple of small divisions there in El Paso to try to nurse these people. But they knew the end was near, that the Union forces, with good leadership, were heading in their direction. And so they decided they needed to march south to San Antonio also. And again, they took mostly sick and maimed people along with them, and they left behind the ones that couldn't walk in the hospital. The hospital, by the way, was the old Butterfield wagon stagecoach stop, which was at the corner of Overland and El Paso Street, and at one time was considered one of the largest buildings in the West.
Interesting. Yeah.
It was used as a hotel, mercantile, stable. It was also built by Anson Mills, incidentally, and so it became the makeshift hospital for the Confederates. Well, when the Union forces got into El Paso, their doctors immediately went to work trying to nurse these soldiers back to health and get them back on their feet. They had a reciprocal agreement, both sides, that when they captured a prisoner, that prisoner had to swear an oath that they would not pick up a gun and fight against the opposing force when they were turned back over to their, if you were a Union soldier and turned back to the Union, you couldn't fight. Now, it didn't mean you couldn't build walls and dig trenches, but you couldn't pick up a gun. And so the Confederate soldiers had to swear this allegiance and then head south to San Antonio. Now, in the process, there was estimates of somewhere around 40 Confederates didn't make it. In 1862 they died, and there's a lot of conversation. They were buried across El Paso Street in what is now underneath an asphalt parking lot. A lot of construction has gone on in that area over the years, and they've not found any remnants of those soldiers. But there was a very strong evidence that at one time there were quite a few Confederate soldiers buried there. A number of other soldiers were buried up by what is now the El Paso History Museum in that big grass lot up there. And when they started doing construction up in that area, they moved those bodies up to Santa Fe to the federal cemetery up there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I have so many questions about these expeditions west from Austin. First, we do need to take a break. If you're just joining us, we're with historian Bernie Sargent. He's become a regular on 915 Talk. These conversations are truly a delight. As a relatively new resident of El Paso, I'm enjoying getting to know the city and the community, the region better through these conversations, because to understand who we are today, it is truly helpful to know who we were in the past. Before we go into the break, KELP Radio would like to thank all of our impact partners. You can see all those impact partners. There's nonprofits, churches, schools, university, even Howard Payne University. You can go to the KELP Radio website, kelpradio.com, go to the impact partner section. Today, I'd especially like to thank Caring Companions. If you have an elderly relative, a loved one who is needing some help around the house, caringcompanionsep.com. I have friends who use them, who have employed their services. They're truly grateful. They speak very highly of them. And KELP Radio would like to thank Caring Companions for joining us in our journey. We're going to get back to our conversation about the Civil War with Bernie Sargent. Do not touch that dial.
We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
Greetings, KELP listeners. My name is Terry Gray, and I have the joy and privilege of serving as the pastor of Calvary Chapel, Sun City, located on the west side of El Paso. I also have the joy of connecting with the radio audience in the borderland through the Summons broadcast heard each weekday at 5 p.m. right here on this station. On Summons, we study the Bible book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, precept by precept. Please join us each weekday at 5 p.m. for Summons right here on KELP.
915 Talk is listener supported and is a production of Desert Voice Media. That's right. It's people just like you who make this program possible. Together with Desert Voice, you can learn how to better serve our neighbors and pray for our community. To become a Desert Voice Media partner, you can visit desertvoice.media. That's right. That's the website, desertvoice.media. Take a look and join us today in reaching our borderland for Christ.
We're back. You're listening to 915 Talk.
We're with El Paso historian extraordinaire Bernie Sargent. We're talking the Civil War and really specifically the borderland and the action that happened here. Bernie, you were talking about, I'm just going to call them expeditions, although there, as you described, there definitely was some fighting that happened, lives lost. It was war happening, coming through El Paso, as things often do, and then into New Mexico. But what I understood you to say is Austin really wanted to make sure that Fort Bliss was, quote unquote, taken care of. And that's interesting because, again, going back to what I mentioned or what we talked about earlier, Austin, Texas made a vote about seceding. Then El Paso took a vote and decided that El Paso would be a part of the secession. but somehow Austin, it seems, felt the need to make doubly sure that El Paso was on board.
Yeah, they did, because it first of all, I think most people were realizing at the time that the geographic location of what became El Paso was very important in a lot of different ways. It was part of Texas. It was the north end of the Rio Grande, and at that time there were also discussions about widening and deepening the Rio Grande and actually running paddle boats from the Gulf all the way up here. Yeah.
Oh wow!
It's quite interesting. We have a Coast Guard station at the crossing at Fort Bliss. I mean, excuse me, at the border. But yeah, there was a discussion about doing that, and so it was
interesting.
Yeah. And
Okay.
it was the only 24/7, 365-day year pass between the East Coast and the West Coast at the time.
Okay.
So it was very,
yeah.
and people like Anson Mills and Josiah Crosby had aspirations of putting together a railroad that would run through El Paso. In fact, Crosby, at the time, right after the Civil War, was living in Houston, and he was president of a railroad that ran from Houston going up to the stockyards in Kansas. So he kind of looked at this area going, that's where we need to put a railroad. And so they knew, they saw what was going on. They saw the opportunities. They were all entrepreneurs in their own way, shape, or form.
Sure. And so these expeditions came to, I guess, secure the borderland, so to speak, because they saw the strategic relevance, importance of the region. And then they kept on going west to get some gold, to put it in simple terms. And it didn't sound like it went super well for them. And ultimately unsuccessful. And Mac Daddy Del Norte is not a huge history buff. It's not his number one subject, but he is. Yeah. That's why we have 915 Talk, Bernie, so Mac Daddy can learn history. But he does know that the North won the Civil War. But what he might not know is really what was the lasting effect on Texas after the Civil War.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because after the Civil War, there was a lot of animosity north to south, sort of reversed. And when Texas was finally, the whole thing was settled and was back part of the North, they had a lot of problems with carpetbaggers, with people going into Texas and using the fact that these darn Southern sympathizers aren't worth anything, so they were going to take advantage of them. In fact, it got to a point where a gentleman by the name of Custer
Right.
was he was commandeered by the government to put together over 1,000 soldiers, cavalrymen, and march into Texas just to keep the peace.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a lot of problem, and they would, in fact, these folks that were kind of pulling the purse strings, the strings in Washington D.C. They thought, well, one way we can get back at these darn Southern sympathizers is we'll send down law enforcement, but let's send down freedmen, African Americans, to be law enforcement.
Wow.
Rubbing salt in the wound, so to speak. And that kind of leads into what we talked about last time with John Wesley Hardin.
Right.
His first altercation, so to speak, was with a freedman and his son.
Right.
But they did that. Well, when Custer got here into Texas, he actually had to pass down an edict that if any of his men were taking advantage of the Southern sympathizers in any way, shape, or form, they would be flogged. And he did it because some of these soldiers said, well, these darn Confederates, they don't deserve this. And they would definitely take advantage of the situation. He wouldn't stand for it. And so that's one of the good things about Custer, that he controlled his troops and he didn't take advantage of the folks as they marched through Texas, ultimately into Austin, where he and his wife Libby traveled with him, were stationed for a period of time, and then he was relocated up north to where he ultimately ended up with the situation at Little Bighorn,
having a Custer's last stand.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
that takes me back to Anson Mills when he was serving after Custer's demise. He was involved with the battle at I think it was Red Bull, or no, Red Rose, where they chased down the natives that had attacked Custer. And one of the villages that he went into, that he was in charge of the soldiers, he actually found Custer's battalion flag that they would fly.
Oh, wow.
It was in front of the chief's teepee. He took it and he presented it back to Libby Custer.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I guess kind of the big headline of Texas and El Paso post-Civil War is that it wasn't like the Civil War ended and racism was immediately defeated in the hearts and minds of the population. There was quite high level, it feels like tension, animosity, and you outline that very colorfully with the story of John Wesley Hardin, and really what every time I think of that conversation about John Wesley Hardin, I laugh and I think how tragic at the same time. What a life. We only have a few minutes left, but the other, and it's not a sidebar, it's a big part of really our region and our history, is where do the Buffalo Soldiers come in?
Yeah, that's interesting. They were, they weren't really in existence until after the Civil War.
Okay.
They were used a little bit, but I mean, they became a very significant part of the military after the Civil War.
Okay.
And what was happening is they're having problems with the natives.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when the Confederates were retreating, they were so beaten and starving that the folks that they had the most difficulty with as they were retreating back down to San Antonio were the Indians, the natives. They kept attacking them. And they had little skirmishes. And once in a while, there'd be Union soldiers involved, but a lot of times it was Mexicans and natives. And
wow.
Yeah. A problem with that. So after the Civil War was over, a lot of the African Americans found an opportunity to become soldiers, and they were great soldiers. They always have been. And they were very good at tracking. They were very solid individuals. They were damn good soldiers, for lack of other terms. And the natives were taken aback by the hair. That was one of the reasons they say that they got the nickname, the moniker, Buffalo Soldier, because their hair resembled the hair on a buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and natives respected them. They really did, because they knew they were great fighters and they were determined in what they were going to do. And very, very true. There was a few commanding officers that were, let's just say they were racists, for lack of other terms, which was not fair to the Buffalo Soldiers. But then there were a few that were very, very good commanding officers and very highly respected. And this is a whole other conversation with, what took place in Mexico after the fact, when we had more battles with them. And we had a number of African Americans fighting in the punitive expedition under Pershing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they served very, very well for them. And they had a couple of Anglo officers. For some reason at that time, they didn't think that the Buffalo Soldiers could have officers. They weren't of that caliber, which they found out was not true. But there's just this stoic opinion that they had that it took a little while for everyone to get over. But they were quite respected.
Interesting. So we only have about a minute left. When we talked about John Wesley Harding, there was no moral to the story.
Don't name your son after a minister.
Right. Yeah. That's true. What would be just a takeaway from El Paso and the borderland and its part of the Civil War history? What can we conclude from this, and how does it affect us today?
I think level heads prevailed, and that after the Civil War, more and more people, soldiers especially, who had been here and traveled through there, they became aware of El Paso, and they saw an opportunity for their families, an opportunity for businesses. And so I think that had a very positive spin for El Paso, because the population of El Paso just exploded. And when the railroad was finally completed in 1881, it just ramped up big time. Federal Reserve opened up their first office outside of Dallas in El Paso because of all the money that was traveling through El Paso, going north, south, east, and west. It was really a great place to be, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that these soldiers traveled through there. Plus, a lot of soldiers contracted tuberculosis, and El Paso seemed to be the panacea to remedy that illness with the clean air that we had at the time. So there's a lot of positive spin on El Paso as the future for a lot of people.
Right. Bernie, always a pleasure. Truly enjoy these conversations. And let's continue to learn together about the history of our city. Let's learn to love our city, love our neighbors, and give God all the glory. This has been 915 Talk. You have been listening to 915 Talk, a production of Desert Voice Media. In order to listen to previous editions of 915 Talk, just visit desertvoice.media. Let's learn together to love our city, love our neighbors, and give God all the glory.